Well, we have those four aspects: character, plot, theme, genre, but we also have four stages or processes or levels of storytelling. I used to call them stages of storytelling when we were dealing with Dramatica, because it seemed like, well, here's the first stage that occurs, and then the second stage, and the third, and the fourth. And we could actually go through four different key stages of the process of a story moving from author to audience. But when I called them stages, it was a little confusing because it seemed like this was a process that an author would follow. Those processes, I'll tell first what they are, and then I'll tell you why they really aren't stages, but they're more like levels of the slices of the story. The first stage of communication is called story forming, and that's where you build your underlying structure, your blueprint, your skeleton for your story, where all the nuts and bolts are hammered in, everything's set in place, and you know what your story is going to be. It's the template, the outline. This is what the story is. Story forming. Next one is story encoding. Stage 2 of communication is story encoding. And story encoding is when you turn all those raw bones, put some flesh on them, and for example, you say, oh, well, my goal is, I have this goal of obtaining something. I want people who are out to get something. What is it? Stolen diamonds, a diploma, all vying for the love of one particular person, whatever that is that they're after, that they're trying to obtain. Well, that's what the encoding is. That's the real people, places, and events that represent the structure. Okay. So you start with, is my goal about obtaining something, or is my goal about becoming something? Well, if my goal is becoming a different kind of person, that's different than a goal of obtaining something, getting physical possession of something, or taking possession of something. So if I decide structurally in story forming, I'd rather have a goal of obtaining than becoming, well then, if it's obtaining obtaining what? And when you choose what it is you're obtaining, well, that is encoding. That's the symbols. Looking at it like reading an ink blot. If you have a picture in an ink blot, and then you see what it means, the ink blot is the symbol, it's the encoding, and the meaning behind it is the structure, going from the other direction. Okay, so this is how we originally did in Dramatica, and then we went to the third stage, which was called story weaving. And story weaving, when Dramatica uses the term, is talking about, well, now that we know that our story is about obtaining stolen diamonds, and that our main character is driven by hope. What is the hope? He hopes that he'll be able to make his wife healthy again, because if he gets the money from the stolen diamonds, then he'll be able to save her, because she's in the hospital and going to die unless she can get an expensive surgery. Okay, something as stupid as that. But now that you know what that encoding is, how do you tell the audience about it? Well, that's what story weaving is. Story weaving is, how are we going to unfold this information? It's part exposition and part style. It's like, how are we going to tell them? We know that our story is about a main character who is driven by hope. And we know that we have a story that has a goal of obtaining something. And the thing he's obtaining is diamonds. And the hope that he has is saving his wife. So now we've got the story forming and the encoding. We understand that. But how do we communicate that to our audience? What are we going to say? Do we tell them up front? Do we drop a little bit of information? Do we fool them into thinking it's one thing and it turns out to be something else? How fast do we give them the information? Who does it come from? Does it come in a conversation, or does it, all these kinds of decisions, that story weaving according to Dramatica's approach. And once you've done that, you sort of have a battle plan of how your story has to be unfolded, but you haven't actually written it yet. You've just figured it out. This is how I'm going to write it, okay? This is not necessarily the writing process. So Dramatica says you go to this next stage of communication, which is called reception. And reception is going to be considering how the audience will interpret what you're doing. Taking the audience into consideration. Audience is more of a collaborator than just a consumer. The idea is that they are going to be looking at those moving images on a screen, interpreting them as people and plants and cars and explosions. They're going to take that further and look between the lines and get the psychological meaning of what's actually happening in terms of events, then understand what that means to the message of the story, and then based on that meaning, they're going to go back and understand the structure, all in their subconscious. All in their subconscious. But that's what they'll be doing. They'll be interpreting every step of the way. Now, every audience member or every reader of your book will interpret it in a slightly different way. But as long as the key elements come through and everyone interprets them the same, then everyone can have their own personal spin on it, and it's okay. Taking into account what your audience may expect or not expect, what your reader may know or not know, and choosing your words as you write so that you will have a particular effect on their reception of what you're doing. Not just that you're telling them this, but how's the experience going to be when you're telling them. That's when you do your actual writing. You have to keep the audience in mind at the reception stage, because that's going to determine the words you use, the phrases you use, the buzzwords they may or may not know, what needs to be explained more fully or not explained at all, what their cultural assumptions are. All of this is in the back of your mind as you're writing. It's what makes you choose one word over another because you think it'll play better, in short. Okay, whatever it is, it's a book or stage play or teleplay or a movie, it will play better. But all those things are working underneath in your subconscious level as an author. Well, structurally that's true. Those are the stages of communication. First there's the structure, and then between the author and the audience, there's a structure, and it has symbols, and those symbols are arranged in a certain way that they are presented, and then it's done with a particular style, okay, and in reception, and those are stages. But no author writes that way. So that's why the word stage is a little confusing, because there's stages of communication when you look at the process objectively and say, here's author, here's audience. But what about when you are author, looking toward audience, okay? Then you don't see these stages. You're looking through them all at the same time. And as an author, you're going to have an idea for, oh, this is a word I've always wanted to use. I just wanted to use the word plethora. I love plethora. I use it in conversation. Everybody says, why do you always use plethora? I don't even know what that means. And I force them to look it up. And then another word that I always use, meld. You know, a lot of people were complaining, what's meld? You know, it looks like well, but I don't know. Simple words that a lot of people know, a lot of people don't know. Okay, plethora means a whole mess of something, and meld means to blend together so that it's seamless. Okay, so these are two of my favorite words. I've always wanted to use them in something. Okay, so that is part of my inspiration. So I looked into my audience. One of the things I want to do is use this particular word. That's reception. I haven't even got a structure. I don't have any symbols. I don't have any encoding. I don't have any story weaving at all. All I've got is a word that I want to use. Okay, so authors will come to things with some words that they want to use. And they'll also come with some story weaving techniques. Like I always wanted to do a twist ending on a plot or something, or I always wanted to come up with, and that's new story weaving. And at the same time you'll say, well, I have this subject matter I've always wanted to deal with, and you're excited about that. That's encoding. And structure, the closest thing to you, according to the 4 stages, the closest thing to the author's finished product, is not the thing you're going to think of first. Structure is almost the last thing you do. Very often, you work from the backside forward, or you can go in any order in between, or you can have, when you come with a story idea, you may have a little bit of reception, a little bit of story weaving, a little bit of encoding, a little bit of structure. You've got all these things mixed up, and none of them is complete, and you certainly didn't do them in order. So that's why I prefer to look at them as levels of a story rather than stages of communication between an author and an audience.